The bank man's boot hit the porch step, and Walter Combs did not even look up from his ledger. "Sign here, Combs, or the house is mine by Friday." Margaret stood by the window, watching her father's hand shake as he held the pen. She stepped forward before he could sign. "Wait," she said. Every eye in the room turned to her, her father's, the bank man's, even the maid's by the door. A big woman speaking up in a room full of men was not something Red Bluff was used to seeing. "There is another way," Margaret said. She walked to her father's desk, picked up the pen from his shaking hand, and set it down flat. "Tom Griggs owes you nothing, but he has land and he needs cash. Offer him a wife instead of a payment. Offer him me." The bank man laughed out loud, a short, ugly sound. That poor rancher won't want a woman shaped like a barrel, girl." Margaret did not flinch. She looked him straight in the eye. "Then he will get a good bargain either way. My hands work, my mind works. That is more than most wives bring." Her father stared at her like he was seeing a stranger. The maid dropped a cup. Nobody in that room expected the soft, quiet daughter to trade herself like cattle with her chin held high and her voice steady as stone. "You would do this?" Walter asked, stunned. "I would do this," Margaret said, "because somebody in this family has to be brave, and it will not be you." Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the windows. Nobody laughed after that. The bank man folded his papers slowly, watching her with new, careful eyes. Walter sat back down, silent, ashamed. Margaret walked out of that room with her head high, not knowing yet what kind of man waited for her at the end of the road, only knowing she had chosen her own fate before anyone else could. The wagon wheel cracked loud against a rock, and Margaret was thrown hard against the wooden side. Tom pulled the horses to a stop and jumped down fast, boots hitting the dirt before the dust even settled. "You hurt?" he asked, reaching up to help her down. Margaret waved him off, climbing out on her own, though her arm throbbed. "I am fine." Tom knelt by the broken wheel instead of arguing with her. He worked in silence, hands moving fast and sure. Margaret watched him for a moment, then did something nobody expected. She rolled up her sleeves, walked to the back of the wagon, and started pulling out the heavy toolbox herself. Tom looked up surprised. "Ma'am, you don't need to." "I know I don't need to," Margaret said, dropping the toolbox beside him with a thud. "I am doing it anyway." He stared at her a long moment like he was trying to solve a puzzle. Then, slowly, he handed her a wrench instead of finishing the job alone. Neither one spoke while they worked, but something quiet passed between them, respect, maybe, or the start of it. When they finally reached the ranch, the house looked small and tired, its porch leaning to one side. Margaret stood in the yard holding her one bag, feeling the weight of everything she had left behind. "It ain't much to look at," Tom said, rubbing his neck. "It is honest," Margaret answered. "That is enough for now." That night she tried to cook over the wood stove and burned the bread black. She waited for Tom to complain. He did not. He ate it in silence, then looked up at her. "Best burnt bread I ever had," he said, and there was no mockery in his voice, only quiet kindness. Margaret felt her throat tighten. No one had ever been gentle with her failures before. Outside, the wind moaned across the empty fields, and far off, a coyote cried into the dark. She did not know yet what dangers waited beyond that lonely house, only that for the first time she did not feel completely alone. Fire cracked across the night sky, and Margaret woke to the smell of smoke choking the air. She ran outside barefoot, not stopping for boots, not stopping for anything. Flames climbed high over the hay stores, orange light dancing across Tom's face as he threw buckets of water that did nothing against the roaring blaze. "Tom!" she screamed, grabbing a wet blanket from the wash line. She ran straight into the smoke beside him, beating at the flames with her bare hands, coughing, eyes burning. "Get back!" Tom shouted. "It's too dangerous." Margaret did not stop. "I am not leaving you alone in this." They fought the fire together until it finally died into black smoke and ash. Tom fell to his knees in the burnt remains, staring at nothing. That was our winter feed, he said, voice cracking. Without it, the cattle die. Without them, we lose everything. Margaret knelt beside him, soot on her face, her hands raw and blistered. She did not cry, she thought. The next morning, before Tom even woke, she saddled a horse alone and rode straight into town. She walked into the bank and sat across from Harold Voss, spreading out numbers she had written by candlelight the night before. I need a loan for feed, she said plainly. My cattle are strong, my numbers are honest. I will pay every cent back by spring. Voss studied her face carefully. Your father's name means nothing good in this town anymore, Mrs. Griggs. I am not asking as my father's daughter, Margaret said, chin high. I am asking as myself. He gave her the loan. When she rode back and told Tom, he stood frozen, staring at her like he had never truly seen her before. You saved us, he whispered. We saved us, she said softly. That night under a wide, cold sky full of stars, Tom finally took her hand not from duty, but because he wanted to. I think I love you, Margaret, he said quietly. She looked at him, her heart pounding louder than the wind outside. I think I love you too, Tom Griggs. Hooves pounded hard through deep snow, and Margaret heard them before she saw them. She grabbed the rifle from beside the door and stepped onto the porch just as Silas Crane and his men rode up through the storm, wind howling around them like angry wolves. Figured you'd be froze out and begging by now, Silas sneered, snow thick on his shoulders. Margaret did not lower the rifle. She did not blink. We are not froze, we are not begging, and we are not selling. Silas laughed, but it sounded weaker than before. That right. A fat little wife holding a gun scares nobody, girl. Tom stepped up beside her, quiet and steady. She scares me plenty, Silas, because she is always right. I'd think hard before you push her further. For a long, tense moment, nobody moved. Snow fell heavy between them, filling the silence. Then Silas Crane, seeing no fear in either face, no cracks to break, turned his horse around and rode back into the white storm, never to trouble them again. Word of that day spread fast through Red Bluff. The heiress once mocked and given away like property was now spoken of with real respect. Even her father heard the stories. One cold afternoon, Walter Combs arrived at the ranch, thin and humbled, his fortune completely gone. He stood awkward in the snow, unsure if he was welcome at all. Margaret, he said quietly, I am sorry. I sold you like you were nothing. I was wrong. Margaret studied him a long moment. Old hurt still lived somewhere in her chest, but it no longer controlled her. You gave me away, father, she said steadily. But Tom saw what you never did. I do not need your sorry to know my worth, but you may come in from the cold. Inside, by the warm fire, Tom held her hand and looked at her like she was the finest thing he had ever seen. They called you the heiress your father gave away, he whispered. I see a queen who built her own kingdom. Margaret smiled, snow falling soft outside the window. By winter, she said, I ruled it all, this land, this life, and your heart too.